My name is Mike McKenzie, and the story I'm about to share with you changed everything about how I see life, death, and the moments in between. I grew up in Lodi, California, a small town I jokingly call the infidel capital of the world. When I got married, my wife and I moved to Southern California, where I worked as a salesman for a tile company. I did well, so well, in fact, that they gave me my own store in Anaheim. But when we started a family, we decided to move back to Central California to raise our kids. We had 4 children, all athletic and active. They played soccer, football, baseball, and everything in between. Over 19 years of coaching, I led more than 30 teams, from T-ball to high school. Life was busy, but it was good. My oldest son, Ben, graduated from college in Santa Barbara, became a nuclear medicine technologist, and met someone in church. They decided to get married, and the wedding was set for the last weekend of summer, just before the younger kids went back to school. We thought it'd be a great excuse for a mini vacation, so we left for Santa Barbara on a Wednesday afternoon. My 2 younger boys brought their wiffle balls and bats, and as soon as we arrived at the hotel, they spotted a park next door. "Dad," they said, "let's play home run derby." So after checking in, we spent a couple of hours playing baseball, laughing, and enjoying the California sun. That night, I started feeling off, like I was coming down with the flu. At first, I didn't think much of it, but by Thursday, the discomfort turned into stomach pain, and by Friday, I was running a fever, sweating profusely, and feeling worse with every passing hour. Still, I pushed through the rehearsal dinner. I joked with the guests, saying, "I might be sick, but I'm getting my money's worth, one of every dessert, and maybe some of yours too." That night, my oldest son tried to diagnose me. "Dad," he asked, "have you had your appendix out?" I didn't think it was my appendix since I didn't have the classic sharp pain in one spot. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong. Around 1 a.m., I went to a convenience store to buy Tylenol. It helped a little, but I still felt awful and didn't sleep at all. The next day was the wedding. I powered through it, smiling for pictures and greeting guests. But as soon as the festivities were over, I told my wife, "I need to go to the hospital. Something's not right." At the ER, the nurse took my temperature, 104.3 degrees Fahrenheit. She poked around my abdomen without much reaction, but then she tapped the bottom of my foot with a reflex hammer. When she tapped my left foot, I screamed in pain. She immediately said, "That's your appendix." Then she asked, "Have you done any physical activity recently?" I mentioned playing baseball with my kids on Wednesday. Her face fell as she realized my appendix had likely ruptured 3 days earlier. I was in serious trouble. The surgeon came in, reviewed my tests, and said, "Your white blood cell count is extremely high. We need to operate immediately." They prepped me, started the 4, and wheeled me down the hall. As I said goodbye to my wife, I couldn't help but notice how cold the surgical room was when they burst through the doors. They slid me onto the operating table, and I thought, how do they work in this freezing room? Then everything changed. I turned my head to the right, and there he was, Jesus. He stood there, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. The doctors, nurses, and the room itself faded away. It was just me and him. I was confused. What's happening? I thought, did I die? I'd heard stories of people floating above their bodies when they died, but I wasn't floating. Still, I knew this wasn't normal. It wasn't a dream. It was something far more real, far more vivid than anything I'd ever experienced. Jesus was unlike any image I'd ever seen of him. His skin was darker, like an Arab man. He wore a white robe, and his wavy brown hair framed striking greenish-blue eyes. When he looked at me, it felt like he could see into my soul. An overwhelming love radiated from him, a love so profound it left no room for doubt. This was Jesus. He held out his hand and said, "I want to answer your prayer." At first, I didn't understand. Then it hit me. I'd prayed this prayer as a child. After my grandfather passed away, I'd attended his Catholic funeral. The priest held a censer, and smoke rose from it as he explained, "This represents our prayers going to heaven." I'd been fascinated by the idea of heaven, a place without pain, sadness, or tears. As a child, I prayed, "Jesus, I want to see heaven." I took his hand, and instantly, we were standing on a hill. Everything around us was white, so bright it was almost blinding. I looked down and saw I was barefoot, still wearing my surgical gown. The grass beneath my feet was perfect, vibrant, and bluish green. I could feel every blade and somehow knew exactly how many were touching me. My senses were heightened in a way that's hard to explain. Off to my right, a brighter white light glowed. Beams of light shot out from it, shimmering as they moved. One came directly at me, and when it touched my forehead, warmth flooded through my body, replacing the cold I'd felt earlier. Then, as if a curtain was pulled back, the whiteness around me parted, and I saw the most incredible landscape. The hill I stood on was covered in pastel flowers, their petals moving as if swaying to an unseen melody, even though there was no wind. Below was a valley, and in it, a grand city. Its golden domes, steeples, and rooftops stretched for miles, partially veiled in white mist. Beyond the city was a mountain blanketed in pine trees, their perfect shapes outlined against the sky. Above the mountain was the most breathtaking sunset I'd ever seen. Reds, oranges, yellows, purples, and blues blending together in harmony. The beams of light continued, bouncing off the trees and scattering like fireworks. Jesus spoke, his voice calm and full of authority. "It's the glory of the Lord." At his words, I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the beauty and power of what I was seeing. The next thing I knew, I felt a jolt and opened my eyes. A doctor was leaning over me, asking, "Do you know your name?" My mouth was dry, but I managed to croak. "Mike?" He asked, "Do you know where you are?" Still disoriented, I eventually said, "Ventura." He looked relieved and told the team, "He's back." The surgeon visited me the next day and said, "That's the worst case I've ever seen," where the patient lived. It took me days to tell my wife what happened. Every time I tried, I broke down in tears. When I finally managed to share the full story, we cried together. The experience transformed me. Before, I was a stressed out, Sunday-only Christian, rushing through life without appreciating it. Now, I take time to slow down, smell the flowers, and marvel at God's creation. Jesus didn't give me a specific task, but I know he wants me to share this message. Slow down, appreciate the beauty around you, and spread love. If you ask God to reveal himself to you, he will, though it might take time. This prayer took 40 years to answer, but what's 40 years to God? I'm not afraid of death anymore. When my time comes, I know Jesus will meet me on that hill and say, "Let's go see what you didn't get to see last time." Until then, I'll cherish every moment and live with gratitude for the time I've been given.